solidarnost. Ovo je bila ključna reč kada je 9. maja 1950. godine, pre 70 godina, Šumanova deklaracija postavila temelje za ono što je danas Evropska unija. Ideja solidarnosti je bila pokretačka snaga u stvaranju nove Evrope, zasnovane na saradnji i zajedničkim vrednostima, gde bi narodi Evrope prosperirali ne na uštrb svojih suseda, već zahvaljujući svojim susedima. Danas, kada se borimo protiv COVID-19, ova reč ima i dalje isto značenje. Solidarnost u pružanju pomoći i izradnji bolje budućnosti. Srećan Dan Evrope svima vama.
Solidarnost.
Solidarität.
Solidariedad.
Solidarnost.
Solidarité.
Solidarità.
Solidaritet.
Solidaridad.
Solidarität. Solidarité. Solidarität.
Solidaritás.
Solidarność.
Solidarität.
All'ilenghi.
All'inghi.
Solidarietà.
Solidaritate.
Solidariteit.
Solidariteit.
Solidarità.
Solidarsus.
Solidarnost. Europäische Solidarität.
Solidaritate.
Yhteenkuuluvuus.
Dear audience, Your Excellencies, friends and colleagues who are now watching this, good afternoon. It is really a great pleasure to be here today as a moderator of a panel discussion on which we are going to celebrate 70th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration and another EU Day. Since this is 2020, and since the situation and the circumstances are really, really particular, I would like to add that I hope that we will soon together celebrate the end of the pandemic of COVID-19 and the end of our fight against this dangerous virus. Today we have 5 distinguished speakers. We have as a sort of a co-host today Fabrizi, head of the EU delegation in Serbia. We also have Ms. Oana-Cristina Popa, ambassador of Romania. We have Jean-Louis Falconi, ambassador of France. Today here with us is also Gilles Bescher-Ploeg, ambassador of the Netherlands, and His Excellency, ambassador of Italy, Carlo Locascio. Good afternoon to all of you. I hope you hear me well, and I'm very much looking forward to your reflections on the Schuman Declaration, having in mind this great round figure, 70 years since it was adopted. But I also hope we will talk a little bit about the EU today, the challenges it is facing, and of course, very importantly, about the relation between Serbia and the EU. Ms. Fabrizi, can I invite you to open this panel discussion and to remind those who are watching this program but are maybe unaware because they are younger about the importance of the Schuman Declaration, with which basically we like to say started the EU grant project as the biggest, you like to say, and the most important peace project in the world.
Well, with pleasure, and thank you, Ljubica, and good afternoon to all the friends who are following us live via Facebook. A special thanks also to my colleague connected to this video. Tomorrow actually, we celebrate the 70 years of the Schuman Declaration, which is in our pantheon one of the most important political initiative that European leaders took only a few years later after the end of the Second World War. And of course, it's not a case that the end of the Second World War and the Schuman Declaration follow almost on the same day. The message was a message of an offer by a Frenchman to his historical enemies, the Germans, but also all the others who fought in the terrible Second World War. And basically was a message of to let's stop doing war, but start to cooperate and let's cooperate on what is really we used to have for making war, so steel and coal. And the whole idea has been a very simple but revolutionary idea to transform competition in cooperation, working together on what is really make a sense, and sharing sovereignty and open this initiative to others. So in 1950, this proposal fell into the ears of leaders who have just experienced the Second World War, the founding fathers of the EU, Sico Manstold, Alcide De Gasperi, Konrad Adenauer, and others. And this fantastic idea in a few years later produced a coal and steel community, European Commission, really economic community. And from there we move to the rest of Europe. And as also a sign that only last week we also celebrate 10 years of the joining of the families of a number of countries from Eastern and Southern Europe. So for us, is a day of celebration, is a day of joy, is a day also in which the main messages that underpin this declaration remain with all their meaning. And as we said in these days, Europe is mourning thousands and thousands of people. But the message of one of the message of the declaration was solidarity, and that's why also as an ambassador here we have chosen solidarity also as a key message for celebrating this idea. This day, which is for all Europe, is not just a day for us. I hope that the Serbian friends feel these days also their own day. Because the European values are European values, and because solidarity is something open to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since we have His Excellency Ambassador of France, Mr. Jean-Louis Falconi here with us, I would like to, Your Excellency, to ask you a question. Europeans are very proud with the Schuman Declaration, but I think French have an extra reason to be proud, since the document, this important document, was drafted by the French foreign minister, and it reads that the whole idea that later became what we now know as the EU was the attempt to, I think it reads, eliminate the age-old rivalry, animosity, the opposition between two very important countries, France and Germany. So how do you feel about that endeavor altogether?
Thank you very much, Lubica. Thank you very much for organizing this event. Well, I feel very European, and that's it. I have to say that it has a special meaning because you're right, this declaration was pronounced in a Salon de l'Horloge in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And throughout the, let's say, 150 years or 80 years of existence of this ministry, when you go into this salon where a lot of things have been, there is this picture of the woman of the Schuman Declaration. So, I mean, this was an important moment among 180 years of the Quai d'Orsay. And in fact, I have to say, as Sam said, in fact, today we are celebrating the 8th of May, which means that in our calendar, the end of the Second World War and the failure of the Nazi regime. And there is a link because I have to say that this declaration was pronounced by Schuman when he was Minister of Foreign Affairs of France as a regular press conference that he used to give every week. And in fact, what was going after this, this very week, around the 10th of May, 1950, was a meeting in London where the Western allies were to discuss the future of Germany, which was getting again, after 5 years, its legal personality and limited sovereignty the year before. So in tradition, the question is, what can we impose against on the losers? How can we go on? And the big surprise was that precisely it was not an everyday type of press conference. He made an offer. So he made an offer to the loser. And this, I would say, is a bit of the surprise of what happened, because he proposed a reconciliation between France and Germany in the context of a reunited Europe. This was very courageous at that time. I have to say that the negotiations on this basis went very quickly. So there was some desire, there was some interest, because in 2 years, the CECA, I don't have the English name for that, but the CECA treaty was adopted. And and I think why is that important is that it puts question on, it brought some answers to some questions as, do I have to give up, should I give up some of my sovereignty, or should I share a part of my national sovereignty, even if I'm on the winner's side, in order to get more global benefit? One question. And he said, yes. Do we have to give before receiving? And he said, yes. Do we have to set a direction which is not necessarily the one that we would say the public opinion 5 years after the Nazi had lost was eager to receive? And he said, yes. So all this was solidarity, sharing, anti-populism, and it brought us, I would say, 70 years of prosperity, freedom, solidarity.
Thank you very much. From one founding country to another, Carlo Locascio, Ambassador of Italy, I would like to invite you to, if we could continue. There is a nice line in the Schuman Declaration saying, suggesting that peace does not come without just by itself. It takes a lot of efforts to build and to preserve the peace. That is one of the sentences most often quoted from the declaration, because it led to the formation of the EU, and it led to what we now call the greatest peace project. How do you see?
Thank you, Ljubica, for hosting this event. Hi to the colleagues, to all the people watching us online. Well, I mean, I would say that it's impossible to achieve the aim without suffering. And certainly peace, prosperity, and unity have been, I think, the most significant achievements of the European Union. And nowadays, we tend somehow to give all of this for granted. But as my colleagues have already pointed out, this idea of joining forces of putting together common resources was really revolutionary in those days. And if we consider those days, those times, to present the idea of solidarity as the key one of this project was really something sensational, and I would say. And this is why I would like to remember fondly the award of the Nobel Peace Prize to the European Union in 2012. And the motivation was, I'm reading, for over 6 decades, the EU contributed to the advancement of peace and reconciliation, democracy and human rights in Europe. And the Nobel Committee also recognized the perspective of EU membership as being bolstering the reconciliation process after the wars in the Balkans. So I think that really peace is still very much at the center of the European project, and rightly so, because peace means unity, and unity, it is exactly what gives us strength. Strength to work together, strength to cooperate, strength to deal together all the challenges European Union and member states have to face in this ever-changing world. Because, of course, we are celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, but I mean, it's been quite a journey since then from all the member states, the founding ones, those who join us later, those who also would like to join us in the near future. It is an important project. It's been the most successful peace, development, prosperity and stability project in the history of the world. It's always been considered a model elsewhere in the world. I remember when I was serving in Southern Africa, you know, they have an integration, a model of integration also down there. And they told me, we always look to what the EU was doing as a model. I think this is also quite relevant to have succeeded to establish an enduring model of peace, stability, prosperity. And now things have changed all around Europe for the better. And we shouldn't forget from where we started, as my colleague Sam and Jean-Louis pointed out. We were coming out for a very difficult period, and we understood, making also some very clever offer, that there was only one possible way ahead: cooperation and reconciliation.
Thank you very much. And switching to His Excellency Gilles Bescher-Ploeg, the Ambassador of the Netherlands, I think perhaps we could even now go further. It is great to have grand ideas, but what makes I think Schuman Declaration special and especially valuable is how the idea was translated into a practical everyday life. The declaration is suggesting that economic interest is important. Elevating the living standards of people is a way of translating the idea of peace and cooperation. This economic element is also very important and one of the key elements of the document.
Indeed, and thank you, Ljubica, for hosting us the day before this important day. Indeed, we consider 70 years ago the birth of modern Europe for the reasons that my fellow ambassadors already have described. And economic cooperation was indeed one of the main elements of the Schuman plan, which was immediately embraced by Adenauer and other European statesmen. And yes, that's right, because first of all, economic cooperation takes away possible reasons for another war, for jealousy, for wishes to have what one doesn't have and the neighbor has. It's important to to create peace, but it is also important to create welfare and to create understanding. And I think in this respect, it is important to remember that our work is not finished. Of course, 70 years we have celebrated an increasing cooperation, increasing peace, increasing prosperity, and we will continue doing so in the coming years with the candidate member states. But the work is never finished. And in a way, and I think the French ambassador already alluded to that, it's because we take things for granted nowadays. The generation of my parents witnessed the war, and for them it was very important to not to repeat that experience. My generation has lived with the histories and the stories of our parents, and we can imagine the horrors of the war. But our children have grown up in complete prosperity and peace, and it's very difficult for them to realize it could be different. And it can be different, of course, if we don't take care. They got used to prosperity, to traveling without borders, to studying in other countries, to working in other countries, paying with the same currency. It's very difficult for them to imagine it could be different. And there's an important task for us to take that further and to take us our responsibility beyond the borders of Europe, I think as well, Luisa. We have a responsibility on the global scene as well. When it comes to fighting poverty, when it comes to solidarity, for inclusiveness, human rights, environment, and things like that. We will address that probably later in the program. But the work is never finished. But the basis, I think, will always be this economic cooperation.
Mm-hmm. And now I would like to invite the ambassador of Romania, Her Excellency Oana-Cristina Popa. There is a line in the Schuman Declaration saying Europe will not be made all at once. It will be built to concrete achievements, and it takes the endeavor takes time. At the time of the drafting and adopting Schuman Declaration, Romania's history was different. In 2007, Romania joined the EU, and we, as your neighbors, and as citizens of a country that is close to Romania, so we can follow the developments in your country, and you are close to us. We can ask you about your experiences. We very often ask you, how does it differ? What did you gain? Have you tested this great idea of unity, solidarity? And has it been the right thing for your country?
Yes, absolutely. But first, thank you, Lubica, for this show, and a warm greeting to my colleagues and to everyone watching. Well, yes, like you said, my country has missed a lot from those 70 years since the Schuman Declaration was signed. We were in a very different historical context than the other countries whose ambassadors are here today, and some of the rest of course, of Western Europe. We were on the sort of wrong side, if I may say so, of the Iron Curtain. And that took a while. And then 30 years ago, when we had a dramatic regime change in 1989, we set as a goal for ourselves to join the European and the Euro-Atlantic communities. And this today, I can say, proved the best decision, nationally speaking, personally speaking, because I would like to follow up on what my Dutch colleague said. For me personally, the EU was a transformative experience. I mean, I have benefited personally from all the advantages, to say, that the EU could bring us, studying in other countries, having exchanges with people from other European countries and so on, things that were unimaginable before 1989. And I had the privilege to be young enough to benefit from all those in the early years when Romania was changing course. I agree with you, and to follow up on that line that you quoted from the declaration, accession takes time, and it's a lot of work. And like my Dutch colleague says, this work is never done. And this is one of the things that I've been saying a lot when people ask me how our experience in terms of EU integration is, how our accession process was. Setting aside all the differences and similarities, work doesn't finish with accession. European integration doesn't finish with accession. It's a constant work of strengthening and deepening that continues long after the actual accession moment itself. And that's why it is so important for a candidate country to understand that the journey is just as important as the destination. And I know that is something that candidate countries don't like to hear, because we didn't like to hear that, but it is true. And we only came to learn that this is true once we became full members, because you cannot perform at the required capacity of being an EU member if you do not go through the journey. And I think we're maybe not saying this enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's a great opening for our the next topic. I think moving from 1950. 2020, jumping. It is a 70-year long jump. How do we see, Mr. Carlo Locascio? How do you see Europe today at the end of the beginning of the new decade? But at the end of what we saw as unprecedented global, not only European crisis, and at the time when our colleagues, economists, fear that economic recession is going to follow COVID-19. So there will be a lot of need for another kind of unity, I guess, and solidarity. What do you see as the greatest challenges?
Well, I mean, we don't have to forget that today European Union's economy it's the second largest economy in the world. This is very important to be recalled, because something that is allowing our citizens to enjoy high standards of living and allows our companies to compete at the global level. And thanks to our economic power, we also have a great deal of influence when it comes to commercial and political negotiations. But even before that, Europe, as I said, has been a very successful peace project for 70 years. The community first, and the Union now granted stability to the whole continent. And our attachment to our fundamental values and principles, to human rights and to rule of law, together with the promotion of cultural diversities, are fundamental feature of our common heritage, which is at the basis of the European integration. Now it's clear that things are changing quite rapidly in this ever-changing world, and the global scene has become more and more multipolar, and the new challenges have multiplied. Therefore, there is only one possible way for the EU member states to promote our values and to defend our interests, and this way is to act together in a very coordinated and effective way. It is clear that in such a new, unpredictable international scenario, a single European state cannot face alone all the international challenges, from pandemics to climate change to migration and to economic crisis. So we have started to put forward common European strategies to deal with all of these transnational issues. So the question now is not if, but when, how we are going to act more and more effectively on these topic. At the same time, it is clear that globalization is generating, how can I say, social and political tensions among member states. We understand, we are realizing, and this is happening also in my country, for example, that there is a certain frustration. But as I said at the beginning, sometimes people who didn't experience the past tend to forget what we got from being part of the EU, which represents, I would say, the DNA of our society nowadays. And certainly from this point of view, COVID-19 crisis and the national and community EU responses to it are a major test for European cohesion. And I would say that maybe at the beginning of this crisis, there was a bit, how can I say, of confusion, but simply because this was a very unprecedented crisis. We were and we are still fighting against an invisible enemy, and so we had to organize ourselves in the best possible way to be more and more effective. I think that now we are moving all together. I want to stress this, all together in the right direction. Solidarity is back to the front, I would say, and recent decisions that have been taken at the highest level in the EU, in the European Council, are right steps in the expected direction. Certainly, I mean, the current crisis hasn't finished, and we will continue to work together in order to fight this very difficult, very challenging battle. Thank you.
Mr. Pluch, if there were no coronavirus, we would be discussing one of the issues that would be discussed in the EU is how to peacefully go through the very end of the divorce between the EU and Great Britain. That was one of the that was an earthquake that marked 2019, and that provoked many to pose that question that I'm sure you've heard many times: is the EU going to survive, or after Brexit you would have other initiatives similar? Whether the EU would grow stronger after this incident, or would it dissolve at the end of the day?
Well, that's a very good question, Ljubica, but I have a very simple answer to that. And I'm completely convinced we will survive. And I'm convinced as well that the United Kingdom made a terrible mistake, but they should discover that themselves. This forces us as the Netherlands within the European Union to rebalance our position within the European Union, because obviously the UK was very close also when it comes to transatlantic ties. And so every country in the EU has its own to define after the exit of the UK. It's a challenge to all of us, and obviously you're right, it's a challenge for the European Union as well. But it points to me to one of the most important challenges in the future, apart from those that already have been mentioned, not the least of them being COVID-19. But I think one of the most important challenges is to keep open the possibilities of criticism, of different opinion, of open discussions, including on Brexit and on possibly leaving the European Union. I think it's so fundamentally basic to the European Union that we have a discussion. There will always be differences between member states, within member states, on policies. And I think the only way forward is open, transparent, not exclude everyone, including everyone. In the future.
Okay, it seems that we have a slight problem with the connection. I hope that you will be back with us briefly. Can I turn to Mr. Fabrizi
I can't hear you now.
Yeah, to ask you, in several speeches covering the state of the EU, European leaders are saying that unity and solidarity and staying together and acting together is a precondition for the EU to still perform its role of a very important international player in the world where differences are growing, divisions are growing, in the world where we have one crisis after another. How important is European unity, but real unity on the ground, not just on the paper, for performing this important international role?
Well, thank you. It's a complex question, and I would say that it's. I'll try to respond saying that the European economy, prosperity, and European prosperity, democracy, and security are already a reality since many years. So basically, we are integrated in a great number of our activities. So basically, it's clear that an effective response will be given by the united response. Mm-hmm. And this is what the European is doing, because basically, if you look at the economic data, for example, we see that the forecast says that some country will contract their GDP a little bit less than the others, means that the economy is in single economic cycle. The same for our security is we are connected by security. Our values and democracy are connected. So for us, the unity is not is an if. Is a question is how this unity would respond. In the case, it's been a little bit, I would say, revealing for us that in the past 10 years, the whole world has been confronted with three different types of crises: an economic one, and a social one, and a health one. So the financial crisis in 2008, 2010, the migration in 2015, and the COVID in 2020. And paradoxically, those three areas was never generated within the EU. So it's not a crisis of the EU. It's external shock that we had to absorb, and we have to set the response on mechanism that we didn't have at the moment. We develop right now an economic tools. We have a migration policy tool. We are right now developing a health response tool. So to cut short your reply, unity is what is how we operate. Is not, there's no other possibility for us. Is because we chosen to work in unity. The crises every time are different, and we have to adapt our own system. But you will see that within the EU and outside the EU, starting from I wouldn't say even outside, but next to the EU, like the Balkans, we are the one who are immediately intervening, while we have still a number of difficulties at home. And we are playing a role globally. You saw the other day, the vaccine pledging conference was took by the European Union to try to find a response to a global problem like the virus in a multilateral environment, not only just within the EU, outside.
Yes, the unity comes together with reforms. Isn't it true, Mr. Falconi? When we talk about reforms, somehow we often quote French President Emmanuel Macron, who is one among not only European leader suggesting if the EU wants to get stronger, it has to reform. So we in this part of the world are looking eagerly to see how this process of reforms is going to unfold because the pace of that process determines the pace of the enlargement. So when we talk about reforms within the EU, how do you see that process?
Well, thank you very much, Ljubica. I would say that as far as reforms are concerned, the objective, I mean, first of all, I don't think what you mentioned, President Macron, I don't think what he wants is referring to institutional reforms. It refers to showing that EU is more effective inside EU and outside EU, because I would say that EU is at the same time strong. We have a lot of assets and very weak. And it's the combination of both. And one thing that has been done, so everybody said that, I mean, all my colleagues showed the different benefits. But it's right that we perhaps, and that's a problem, lost some part of the public opinion in our countries. I think we are all convinced that what's going on is with EU is good, that it produced a lot of benefits. Perhaps the problem is that we forget that this needs efforts, and the populations lost sight also of this. This can come from disinformation, but undoubtedly there is the fact that we have to convince the people. So we have to bring back Europe to something where people in their everyday life see that there are some benefits. This is why the reforms that Macron is mentioning are not things for the very long run or institutional things, but very practical things like more social Europe, like taking care more about the environment, which is a concern of people, being more open to new challenges. And of course, one of the big challenges today is to prove to our people that we are managing collectively in Europe and with our neighbors efficiently this crisis, which means that we have the good answers. And so, of course, you know, it's not an integrated EU policy. So we have national answers in terms of health, but they are very much coordinated, in fact. And we have to prove that, and I think that some things have been done. You've seen at the beginning of the crisis, the first temptation is to close borders, not necessarily because it's relevant, but because it's something we can close. I mean, you can't close the way between Paris and Marseille, but you can close the border to France. This is still possible. Is it the good choice? Not necessarily. So the ministers and the heads of state went very quickly into discussion saying, look, I mean, we must not show distrust, we must build things, and this is how the green lanes came, for instance, and the Balkan country also had a very good reaction on that, which means that, which could have been a disaster, which is preventing any kind of national, getting the necessary resources, food, everything, a minimum for the company to work for, to survive. Well, this has been organized, this has been done. This is one aspect. On the EU, on the economic aspect, this is also very obvious. I mean, have you seen, so we are not at the end yet because there are still some questions which remain to be done, but so much money has been injected in our economy to preserve employment, to give social benefits to the people who cannot work. Of course, now we have to tackle to go back, but I mean, nowhere else in the world, I guess, has so much money been put to protect the economies, to protect our workers, and to restart smoothly. So, I mean, when you mean, just to sum up the reforms that you mentioned, I think it's a challenge for President Macron to realize that we are convinced we do good things, but our opinions need to be convinced. And these are some concrete steps. It's also the same on the international aspect. We have to convince our opinion, but the rest of the world is important. And this is also the other thing which is important in what he aims to do, is to try to define some kind of European sovereignty, because we have partners, we have countries who we discuss with throughout the world. But the reality is that we are very strong ourselves, and we must believe in ourselves, and we have to build some kind of European sovereignty to defend ourselves better compared, with a link to the rest of the world. And this is also a big challenge. It's not easy because we have to define this, but this is a notion that needs to be put more and more forward, because we are challenged also by the rest of the world and even by our allies.
Thank you, Mr. Falconi. Ms. Popa, we from time to time hear about the old Europe and the new Europe. What is the role, in your opinion, of countries like Romania in this process of getting the EU stronger?
Well, if I were to refer to something extremely recent, and then maybe I can go back in time, is that on March 19, when the European Commission announced it was creating a strategic stockpile of medical equipment to fight COVID-19, we were the first country that volunteered to purchase and host on behalf of the European Union a stockpile of medical equipment. So there we had a very active role in actually supporting the rest of the Union. But when we go back in time, we've received that question a lot during our accession process. What are you going to bring to the Union? What is the Union going to benefit? How is it going to benefit? Well, first of all, let's not forget that the sort of motto of the EU is unity in diversity. So that's the first thing. The diversity it brings is a good thing. Then secondly, well, we each have experiences that are extremely useful for the others. We have advantages that are useful for the others. We have workforce, we have agriculture, we have economic sectors. For example, we have developed a very strong IT sector in those years when, let's say, since we joined the EU. So there are, of course, a lot of fields and ways that a newcomer can bring a plus to the rest of the Union. There is no lose-lose situation here. There's only win-win. Now, the question that needs to be answered before this, and the condition that needs to be fulfilled, is that the country is prepared to join, and therefore to complete the necessary reforms. But once that is done, each country, member state today, had something to bring to the EU. Mm-hmm. So I would totally dismiss the idea that the EU is helping a member state, but the member state doesn't bring anything to the Union. That situation doesn't exist. On the other hand, when it comes to solidarity, and like Ambassador Fabrizi said, with all those consecutive crises that have taken place in the past decade or so, solidarity is something that is being built every day. It's an exercise that we do every day. It's not just during a crisis. And secondly, solidarity is being tested during the darkest times. It's not, solidarity doesn't sort of come into discussion when everything is rosy. It comes into discussion when things get tough. And I think that the COVID-19 crisis, be it as slow as it was at the beginning, although I wouldn't call it slow, there were certain mechanisms that needed to be put in place. The EU has very thorough mechanisms. Sometimes those take time. But at the end, they were efficient, they were inclusive, they were democratic, and they prevailed, those measures. So we need to look at the end product. And the end product is always the sum of everything that it contained beforehand.
Mr. Fabrizi, can I invite you to answer this? How would you describe briefly, like for the news flash, how would you describe the relationship between European Union and Serbia today?
I would say close. I would say element of dependence, an element of the desire to do more. I think the COVID crisis, if I have to take it as a last test, see that we have shared also this challenge together. And this, but at the end of the day, this crisis also has brought us closer together. A number of, let's say, mechanisms. I don't want to sound institutional, but the EU is also operate according to institutional mechanism. And if you see where Serbia was on 1st of March, let's say, and where Serbia is on 8th of May, you see that in little than 5 or 6 weeks, Serbia is part of our joint system of response in health, in economy. Jean-Louis mentioned the green lane. We have repatriated national from Serbia from China, and Serbia has repatriated the EU national from over. In the sense, from the, I would say, to the digital to analogic, certainly push us to work much more together. And I think also the messages emerge at the Zagreb Summit a couple of days ago goes in this direction. So I would say we are much more closer than we were two months ago.
Mr. Pluch, 2 days ago there was this virtual Zagreb Summit where the EU met Western Balkans. I don't know if you covered all headlines in Serbia, but almost every piece of news read the document, the Zagreb Declaration, does not talk about enlargement. It talks about European perspective. If you were a citizen of Serbia, would you be concerned by that fine-tuning when picking the words to describe the level of our relations, whether it's the process of enlargement or the perspective to become of enlargement or the perspective to become a member? We can just make sure that your microphone is switched on.
It's okay like this. I'm sorry for that. It's a very good question, and I'm sorry I'm unable to answer for the Serbian citizens, because that is something we really need to look into, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But indeed, you're right. There have been some concerns that enlargement as such was not addressed at the summit. I think there is nothing illogical about that. It's a question of priorities at this time of of history where we are with this pandemic. We need to carefully choose what is our biggest concern. As to enlargement, that is a process that has been going on for quite some time. We gave our commitment, we as the European Union and all its member states, quite some time ago, and we stand by that. Our commitment is beyond doubt. Your government and the other governments in the Western Balkans are saying they are committed as well. But still, it takes quite some time. And that's because obviously there are concerns both on the European side and obviously also on the Serbian side. And I think it's therefore very necessary for us as European ambassadors to go out of our offices and to have this discussion with ordinary Serbs in the streets, in the rural areas, in the cities, what the advantages of the European is, what the European actually is, because there's a lot of disinformation as well. So we need to have that discussion. And we also need to have that discussion at home, why it is necessary to enlarge the European Union. Because, to be honest, and now I can speak, of course, for my co-citizens, there are quite some people who have doubts whether enlarging at this stage will fortify and will strengthen the European Union. Well, I don't have any doubts at all, but it takes convincing, and it takes, again, this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Popa, maybe you can join here. We are used to full-hearted support from the neighboring countries countries, from the point of Romania being a member of the European Union, how do you see this debate, enlargement or European perspective, faster pace or slower? If you can also switch the mic.
Excuse me. We have always been a staunch supporter of enlargement and a strong supporter of the Western Balkans, and in particular a strong supporter for Serbia, our neighbor, to join the EU. So we believe that enlargement is the most successful policy of the European Union, and we are a living example of that. And therefore we strongly believe that all countries of the Western Balkans should join. Now, related to the Zagreb Summit, well, I think it's extraordinary that under the circumstances the meeting could take place at all, even though in virtual format. I think that is a very, very good sign towards the Western Balkans that enlargement is on the table and that the region is important to Europe. Having in view these extraordinary circumstances, I wouldn't be concerned about the choice of language. European perspective is there. Enlargement is on the table. It has been said numerous times. It's just a question of overcoming this current crisis before we can go back to the usual topics of the EU. And slow or fast, again, is not the question. The question is the thoroughness of the journey. That's the most important thing, to complete all the obligations in order to be able to exercise the rights. This has always been the discussion, at least from my country's perspective. We were, of course, very keen to get those rights of being a member of the EU, but then we also have to fulfill the obligations, which is the hard part.
Mr. Falconi, we have this new methodology now for the Western Balkans countries. That methodology came as a result of a debate that was sparked, I think, by some leaders, including the French president. If I were just like I asked Mr. Fabrizi to give a very brief definition of what does it take? What does it take on Serbian part to make this process of enlargement quicker, or at least to make the perspective more feasible? The EU perspective.
Well, thank you, Ljubica. First of all, yes, one of the reasons why the Zagreb Summit, perhaps is 2 weeks according to the press feeling about the commitment, is that it's been done already in March. So the big question of the new methodology confirming opening accession negotiations for 2 new countries and so on, which was the big challenge in the autumn, has been already answered in March. So the new Zagreb Summit in May, in fact, was not about this. This is considered as done. So honestly, you don't want to sell twice what's been already given. That's one point. The second point is on the new methodology. I like to say that when President Macron expressed himself in October, I remember a lot of reactions saying this is another argument to delay the enlargement process, to bring in some new, etc., etc. Well, the idea was just to make the negotiation more concrete, to build it in blocks, to have more coherent block, and to bring more access to EU policy. So, in fact, to already make the countries of the who have fulfilled some obligations part of EU before even legally becoming members. So this was the prospect, to make them feel the prospects, and in fact leading to accession, of course. This is also the other objective. And this was not an argument to delay. This has been discussed honestly by all member states in the EU, and this has been adopted in 5 months. So I would say I very often hear in Serbia, well, we have to wait for the new methodology, and then we have to wait for the reforms, and then we have to wait. Well, okay, methodology is there. The EU reform is ongoing. So I think the biggest challenge for Serbia to join the EU is with Serbia itself, which is making the, I'm sorry to say that, but to make the necessary reforms. And I like very much what Oana said. I mean, it's very interesting that what she said is key. I feel it. In 1989, they had a profound regime change. And then thereafter, the key determination from the Romanian authorities and people was to do anything which is necessary because they were desperate to get into the EU. And I tell you something, this is the key. If you don't have this, already you have a part of the answer that it may not succeed. So if you start to ask yourself questions, it's already, you put yourself in an indecisive situation. So the promise has been done. It will be held. I remind that the Zagreb Summit, in fact, in 2000 was under the French presidency of the EU. So the promise has been done. It will be held. There are things going on in parallel, new methodology, EU reform, but the key is the reform into the country itself. And if you don't believe in yourself, if you don't want to make all the efforts, this is the key to the answer.
Mm-hmm. I would like to now use the question that came from my colleagues from Beta News Agency, and this could, I'm directing it to Ambassador of Italy and of course to His Excellency Sam Fabrizi as well. But if you, dear panelists, want to jump in, you are more than welcome. How do you comment altogether of the context of the Zagreb Declaration, and especially the part that deals with the investment fund for the region and for Serbia? The Commissioner for Enlargement, Oliver Varhelyi, in his op-ed piece that ran in our newspapers 2 days ago, spoke about that extra effort the EU will undertake to boost the economy and to bring new kind of into the region and in Serbia.
No, first of all, let me tell you that I agree with what my Romanian colleague said a few minutes ago, that, I mean, we were successful in defending the idea of enlargement even during the current crisis with Zagreb Summit. And it was very important that in declaration, new member states and new institutions restated their unequivocal support to the European perspective of the Western Balkan countries, who, on the other hand, reiterated their strong commitment to join the EU. I wouldn't understand that some people try to find a subtle difference between enlargement and European perspective. But what matters, in my opinion, is the sense of direction. It's a matter of commitment on both sides. It has to be, in other words, a joint effort, because the actions of both the EU and the Western Balkan countries must be credible, consistent and coherent. So while reform process in the region must continue consistently, you must stand ready to encourage and reward the efforts made by the candidate countries in advancing in the negotiations. So there are 3 key points from our point of view. Reforms, which are absolutely necessary, incentives to push this virtuous process in the candidate countries, and of course, rewards. If we are asking for something and something is done, at the end of the process, there has to be reward. In the end, we all share the same goal. We want to make Europe stronger, more resilient, and more capable to act as a global player. I think this is both in the interest of the EU member states and the candidate countries.
Mr. Fabrizi, just before you continue, 3.3 billion euros were pledged for the Western Balkans at the Zagreb Summit as an assistance to overcome not only COVID-19 but what will follow. So apart from that, we talk about now for a couple of months, talk about this economic investment plan for the region. And I see my colleagues are particularly interested in that part, maybe because of this new wave of economic challenges that we are facing. What can you tell us about that?
Well, first, it's I confirm it's 3.3 billion. We are not pledged by, or is a real money, so committed, and is part of it has been already spent. When you go to the main area, for example, we already spent in the past 5 weeks 50 million euro in a grant for immediate health assistance. So, in sense, this money are already translating into real action. Of course, the Commission and the Council agreed on the wider package. Is articulated in different formula, is grant, is loan, is guarantee. So it is a package that we have offered to the Western Balkan 6. So I would spend just a second just not to pocket immediately this important financial contribution, which is not a minor one. Of course, the idea of an economic recovery plan remains there. There's a commitment into the declaration in Zagreb. Of course, is linked to the MFF, so the multi-annual financial framework. This is our budget, where all the funds would come. And certainly, the idea of the Commission is, on one side, is to increase, if possible, the amount of fund that the Commission is asking for the neighborhood policy, mostly for the Western Balkans. As you saw that in the May 2018, the proposal of the Commission is for 14.5 billion euro in IPA, so maybe in grant for the Eastern and Southern. So basically, great part is the Western Balkan. So the package will be linked to the MFF. We need to talk also from the Western Balkan 6. What is their line? What is also the way they want to project the economic recovery? But as I said before, the economic recovery of the Western Balkan is very much goes hand in hand with the one of the European Union. And I shouldn't repeat here the trade investment of this Western Balkan region is around 60 and 75% with the European Union. So we are part of the same economic cycle. The Commission is determined has been received a mandate to prepare a robust economic recovery plan. It will be discussed presented in the autumn. And if I may also conclude, the element of solidarity in Europe means also element of responsibilities. These two elements need to go hand in hand, and the responsibility in this case means reforms. That's why Serbia shouldn't lose the sight of reform. The process of accession is continuous. Reform needs to be done. It's never finished. And also for the European Union, economic difficulties pose on us still the need to reform and to continue our reform. Serbia has to do the same, so while waiting for the economic recovery plan, don't forget the numbers of reform that will allow Serbia and the Western Balkan region to benefit of these resources. Because if we put resources on creating a green job, digital job, social job, is the legislative social infrastructure ready to use these resources? There's also a question of absorption capacity and desire to use these resources for projects related to infrastructure, environment, digital.
My last question, very last question is, could the economic slowdown, I don't want to call it crisis, and I hope it won't be a crisis, just a slowdown, but should there be an economic slowdown, could that further postpone or slow the pace of the enlargement process for the Western Balkan countries? Could it further delay Northern Macedonia, Albania issue, and the Serbia and Montenegro opening the chapters and going forward? Whoever wants to take this question. Mr. Pluch.
Yes, well, in my opinion, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, and it shouldn't be the case. I think that economic slowdown in itself, of course, is worrisome, but the main things to be done right now is, as my colleague said, reforms, and that can very well be done in an economically difficult situation. Of course, it imposes certain concerns, but I think we should. It's possible to continue the way ahead. The main item to be looked at this stage, I think, is the upcoming elections, which would be a very clear indicator of reforms. And here, everyone has responsibilities. The government has a responsibility, the Serbian government, to provide a level playing field. The opposition has a responsibility to offer an alternative. And the public has a responsibility to go out and vote. I mean, this will be a very important moment for the European Union to watch. And that should be able to continue without any influence by economic developments.
If I can chip in just to complement the question, is if we look at what happened within the EU in the past 5 weeks, we devise new tools, framework for unemployment people, bank guarantee, recovery fund, unprecedented measured by the European Central Bank. So we are certainly not stopping because the slowdown. On the contrary, in Europe, we always say, never waste a good crisis to make a step forward. And if you think what we have done with the Western Balkan, notwithstanding the crisis, I think there's all element to not use the economic difficulties as an excuse not to move forward. And this is responsibility on both of us.
I agree, if I may, even such a painful and tragic crisis that many countries in the EU are experiencing can offer to all of us a great opportunity to do even more to improve ourselves.
Thank you very much. Ms. Popa, were you?
Yes, I just thought I was going to say that in those cases, the only way is forward. So yes, definitely the process can and should continue. And sometimes slow times are a good moment to do some work and, take advantage of the sort of quiet around and work maybe on the technical and the technicalities of the accession process as well.
Mm-hmm. Monsieur Falconi, le dernier mot.
I have the privilege of saying that I think my colleagues said it all, and my feeling is that the most difficult reforms in Serbia are not necessarily the ones directly linked to economy and they are reforms, I would mean, in terms of fight against corruption, rule of law, that can be done, I would say, anytime, and also in times of economic crisis.
Thank you all very much. It was a great discussion. I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon in person. And I don't have to say at the end of this panel discussion, stay at home. You don't have to stay at home any longer, but you do have to stay well. And happy Europe Day to you and to all of our friends who have been watching this program.
Thank you very much.
Hvala puno.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Solidarnost. Ovo je bila ključna reč kada je 9. maja 1950. godine, pre 70 godina, Šumanova deklaracija postavila temelje za ono što je danas Evropska unija. Ideja solidarnosti je bila pokretačka snaga u stvaranju nove Evrope, zasnovane na saradnji i zajedničkim vrednostima, gde bi narodi Evrope prosperirali ne na uštrb svojih suseda, već zahvaljujući svojim susedima. Danas, kada se borimo protiv COVID-19, ova reč ima i dalje isto značenje. Solidarnost u pružanju pomoći i izradnji bolje budućnosti. Srećan Dan Evrope svima vama.
Solidarnost.
Solidarität.
Solidariedad.
Solidarnost.
Solidarité.
Solidarità.
Solidaritet.
Solidaridad.
Solidaritet. Solidarité. Solidaritet.
Solidaritás.
Solidarność.
Solidarität.
All'ilenghi.
All'inghi.
Solidarietà.
Solidaritate.
Solidariteit.
Solidariteit. Solidarità.
Solidarsus.
Solidarnost.
Europäische Solidarität.
Solidaritate.
Yhteenkuuluvuus.